Hello, my name is Cassandra Van Tassel, and I was assigned all over the place, differences in and consistency of excess mortality estimates in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. We will begin with an overview of the study's context and objectives, study design, and its measures. In September of 2017, the island of Puerto Rico was hit by consecutive hurricanes Irma and Maria. Hurricane Maria is the strongest storm to hit Puerto Rico in over a century, making landfall on September 20th as a Category 5 storm. The government initially reported 64 storm-related deaths. However, many speculated the counts to be significantly higher. Several entities undertook the task of attempting to calculate more accurate figures. Due to varying methodologies, however, these studies yielded varying results, which led some to criticize the numbers as all over the place. This commentary attempts to synthesize these results in terms of methods employed and assumptions made to arrive at a consensus estimate of the excess mortality that were attributable to the hurricanes. The authors note that this paper is a commentary, and in fact, they make no use of standard study methods that were studied in this class. This commentary is more a comparison of various studies, almost meta-analysis, and less a traditional cohort study, as the data being studied here are simply aggregate death counts. However, because of the need to compare mortality rates post-hurricane, the outcome, to a counterfactual estimate of mortality had there not been a hurricane, the exposure, it is fair to draw parallels to the retrospective cohort design study model. With those caveats in mind, we can examine the selection of the population that was examined. For the exposed populations, the authors analyzed mortality data after Hurricane Maria from 7 different studies and replicated those results in the studies where the registration estimates and vital registration data were not the most up-to-date. For the unexposed, it is noted that each study had a different method of choosing a time period from which to draw their counterfactual mortality rate estimates, each with its own advantages and disadvantages. The authors noted that using mortality data from within a year or two of the hurricanes as being the most accurate representations of average mortality. After analysis of the various studies and adjusting for displacement due to out-migration after the storm, as well as other factors, the authors note that despite differences in the individual study results, all analyses are generally consistent in their estimation of the mortality impact of these storms. They concluded that somewhere between 3,000 and 3,500 deaths are attributable to the effects of the hurricanes. Now we will look at a critique of the study. While this is not a traditional cohort study, the potential for bias was still present when attempting to extrapolate a consensus from these datasets. The authors remained aware of this and made explicit and intentional attempts to minimize bias. As discussed earlier, in order to remove any information bias, the authors replicated the results in those studies where registration-based estimates and vital registration data were not the most up-to-date by using the same methodologies that were outlined in each study with the most recent data. Because of this, the possibility of information bias was greatly minimized. Since the studies were analyzed and replicated with information obtained from vital registration data, and since the examination of the studies included multiple different time periods to establish counterfactual mortality rates, selection bias is also unlikely. The authors note that one study obtained its findings from household survey data and thus was subject to survivor bias. This study was adjusted and reanalyzed by the authors using the original study's data to arrive at an unbiased estimation. Again, since this study was not a traditional cohort study and was merely a comparison for commentary, the authors provided no statistical calculations for relative risk in their examination. They did, however, in their explanation of the individual studies, note confidence intervals where they were noted by the individual studies. The authors also made intentional effort to separate datasets by those which adjusted rates due to outmigration displacement after the storm and those who did not. Efforts to minimize the influence of confounding in the interpretation can be seen in the selection of counterfactual time periods used for comparison in the post-hurricane mortality rates. By analyzing and comparing studies with variances in their selection methodologies, the investigators were sufficiently able to minimize the influence of confounding. The study concludes that while all the estimates are representative of the actual attributable mortality rates post-Hurricane Maria. Those that are most accurate are those that adjust for displacement due to outmigration after the hurricanes. Please leave any comments or questions below. Thanks.